You wouldn't put a square peg in a round hole, so why would you deploy a traditional firewall in a modern decentralized network? Firewalls have new requirements for businesses leveraging SaaS-based applications and public cloud platforms like AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. We're in the cloud generation now, so your firewalls have to be engineered to fit right in. Reclaim your cloud network. Try a Barracuda Cloud Generation Network or application firewall free at barracuda.com/firewalls.
NFL Live is on the air, and following this timeline, Patriots linebackers coach Brian Flores will call the defensive plays, but will not assume the role of defensive coordinator. Just after 1 o'clock here on the East Coast, sources tell our Jeremy Fowler Steelers wide receiver Antonio Brown has restructured his contract to significantly reduce his base salary.
Yeah, Wendy, Antonio Brown, this will save the Steelers $9.7 million on this year's cap. It'll guarantee him all his salary and roster bonus for this year. Win-win.
Coming up on NFL Live, could LeBron James be taking his talents to Pittsburgh? But first, we're live from Alabama's Pro Day. NFL scouts and coaches in Tuscaloosa. And there's the man himself, his best football moments coming up here on NFL Live. Hello there. Glad to have you along with us. Damian Woody, Dan Graziano, and Todd McShay. Mel Kiper will join us shortly. And in case you haven't heard, I don't know if you did, but Kirk Cousins set to become a free agent.
Cousins?
That's right.
The Washington quarterback?
The Washington Redskins quarterback. Yeah. They are going to back up the truck, it would seem. And here's what Kirk Cousins has to say. For the first time since 2007, he'll get to officially choose where he plays. Also this, let the recruiting begin. Kirk Cousins, they'll have you. They think Demaryius Thomas thinks they would be a dangerous combination. And then there's this from Von Miller. He would not only be a difference maker to my team, but to any team he goes to in the NFL. It's an instant upgrade leadership. He can throw and make all the passes on the field. So yeah, when you get a guy like that, you're automatically in Super Bowl contention. That is a big statement from Von Miller. But again, we have talked a lot about Kirk Cousins because we expect in terms of quarterback, he'll be the first domino to fall, if you will. So Dan, I'll start with you about the possibility specifically with Cousins in Denver.
Denver's going to have a hard time. I mean, Von Miller and Emmanuel Sanders are enthusiastic cheerleaders. They're not salary cap experts. And the Denver Broncos would have to clear a significant amount of salary cap room in order to pursue and sign Kirk Cousins for the amount of money he's going to want. So the question becomes, if you do that, what have you done? Have you do you still have Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas, or did you have to get rid of them in order to clear cap room? If that's the case, are you still a place to which Kirk Cousins would want to go? So I think the Broncos are kind of up against it versus the other teams like Minnesota and the Jets that we've heard expected to be in the Cousins mix, but nothing's impossible. I just don't put them at the top of the most likelies right now.
This is the trick. I mean, if you're a team and you have the resources, the personnel to win right now, then it makes sense. But if you think you're going to build, forget it. You can't build and put together a team when you're bringing in a salary this big. And so that's why I think the Vikings is the best place for him, because they can win right now with him, and then down the road they'll have to deal with the salary cap. Because, listen, he's a very good quarterback, but he is not elite. He is not carrying a football team on his shoulders. And so that, to me, I would rather gamble with drafting a young quarterback if I don't have a roster to win right now, and develop that roster and pay him a fraction of what we're going to pay Kirk Cousins.
Well, I think that begs my next question. Von Miller obviously trying to sell his team, and that makes a lot of sense. But do you agree with him that, at least in terms of the Broncos, adding Kirk Cousins makes them an instant Super Bowl contender? Is he the one piece they're missing?
Yeah, if we're talking about the status quo, like no other roster moves are being made as far as them losing personnel, then I think he's correct in that sense. But when you look at the salary cap situation, like Dan and Todd talked about, they're going to have to make moves. They're going to have to make changes to clear up room for Kirk Cousins to sign with the Denver Broncos. And what quarterback is going to want to sign on a team where they're going to actually have to take away pieces in order to acquire him? That would, to me, wouldn't be the smartest move if I'm Kirk Cousins.
Well, these are considered the 4 potential landing spots for Kirk Cousins. The Jets have the most money to spend. just about $90 million. So if it becomes about the dollars, you have to figure the New York Jets are in pretty good spot. And then the Vikings, Broncos, and then at the bottom of the list there, the Arizona Cardinals. Kirk Cousins has to make his decision. That will affect the decisions teams make in the draft. We know that. It's the way it works. And here's Todd McShay's mock draft version 3.0. There are some changes which we'll walk through. He's got Sam Darnold, the quarterback, going number 1 overall to the Cleveland Browns. But we'll take a look now at the differences between Todd and Mel's latest mock drafts, specifically with regards to the quarterbacks. You can see where they differ right there. And with that, we will turn to Mel, who joins us now along with Todd McShay. And Mel, you guys have a different take on the number 1 overall pick.
But Wendy, read after Darnold in that little analysis that Todd did for Cleveland and Darnold. He mentions, hey, Josh Allen could easily be the number 1 pick here. So finally, Todd is jumping on that Josh Allen bandwagon, as pretty much everybody is right now.
How do you get that out of me putting Darnold at 1? You're unbelievable.
Because I read what you had to say underneath it, Todd.
Listen,
Did you read your own words?
I think it comes down to two quarterbacks, and I think a part of it is the weather, big hands, big arm, and Darnold is plenty big, but Allen is a different level. But Allen, there's more risk with Allen than there is with Darnold. Let's put it that way. I think Darnold is the safest of the group because he has the best mental makeup. He has the most durability that he's proven over his career. He doesn't have shoulder injuries and issues like Josh Rosen and Josh Allen, and Rosen has the concussions as well. So to me, if you were Cleveland and you're sitting there and say 20 years we've gone without a legitimate number 1 quarterback, and you can't miss again. You can't pull a Johnny Manziel, a Whedon, or a Brady Quinn. I think Darnold makes the most sense. Now, if you look and say the best player in the draft, that's Saquon Barkley at running back, so you better get A.J. McCarron in and then be willing to use a different pick on a quarterback as a backup behind McCarron for the first year. But to me, I think Darnold, if you stay at 1 and don't have a veteran, Darnold is the safest pick where 5 years from now you're not going to look and say, here we are again, trying to draft a quarterback early.
Well, Mel, I'll ask you the same question that we talked about at the Combine last week. Obviously, Darnold electing not to throw, but to wait until his pro day, March 21st. Most people say in the long run doesn't make a whole lot of difference. Do you agree?
Well, I think with that delivery, Wendy, and I've talked about this a lot, when you have that long, elongated delivery, it's not picture perfect like the other quarterbacks. I think you wait until your pro day. I didn't have a problem with that. And that whole competitiveness issue, I don't worry about. That's going to be forgotten once his pro day occurs. That's easy to talk about when everybody else is out there throwing and he isn't. But I think it gets down to that delivery. To have it on display against all those other quarterbacks, everybody watching it and making more out of it than it is, wait for your pro day. I had no problem with that. But I get back to what Todd said about that whole thing about being safe with one over the other. I heard the same thing about Mark Sanchez. He had the intangibles. Stafford had the big arm. He was a thrower, not a pitcher. And look what happened. Stafford, 1,000 times better than Mark Sanchez. So I don't always equate safe to being the best long term.
Go ahead.
Go, Todd. No. It's all you. This is all you.
No, there's a big difference between that comparison. It doesn't really hold up because it's not just intangible.
That's revisionist history, Todd.
You're talking about a guy who creates and is a magician in the pocket versus Allen, who has completed 56% of his throws. So, I mean, they're both really talented. Bradford is just a little bit more complete.
To me, go back, I said Sanchez and Stafford was the comparison. The same things were said about Sanchez and Stafford are being said about Darnold, USC quarterback, another one, and Allen. And I've compared Allen to Stafford because Stafford had a lot of critics, Todd, who were saying, hey, he's a thrower, not a pitcher. And
Stafford's the only one.
Only at 57. He was at 57.1, not that much better than 56.2.
Go list your top 15 quarterbacks in the NFL, and every single one but Stafford completed more than 60% of his throws. Listen, it's just a stat. I like Josh Allen a lot.
Hey, Todd, it depends how far you want to go back. Okay? You go back into the 80s and early 90s, I can find you 15 to 20 big-time quarterbacks who are around 50 to 55% coming out of college.
Welcome to the new millennium, bud.
All right, gentlemen. And to think the calendar has yet to turn to April. You know, we got plenty of time to disagree. We got so much time. I'll get a different take on this, Dan, because I know you were at the Combine as well. Coming out of the week, did you see any change when you talk to teams or hear anything different about Sam Darnold than you would have going into the week?
No. In fact, I thought there was less chatter about Darnold and the people I talked to than there wasn't anybody else, because Josh Allen had the monster workout. And there are all these questions about him. There were questions about Josh Rosen and interviewing and personality that we've discussed. Same Baker Mayfield to a certain extent. Lamar Jackson. I didn't hear much about Darnold, and maybe that kind of underlines what you're saying, exactly, right? Maybe people already knew what they were getting there, and I don't think anything really happened to change it there in Indianapolis.
I find all this funny because here it is, Josh Allen, and we always talk about a lot of these quarterback prospects. Accuracy. That's really the number one thing when you talk about quarterback is accuracy. Mm-hmm. I haven't heard anyone say anything about him being accurate. All of a sudden, you're supposed to come in the league and you, quote, unquote, become accurate. If you're the Cleveland Browns and you've missed time after time after time again with quarterbacks, why in the world are you going to go and draft a guy? Yeah, he looks like the statuesque type of quarterback. But if he's not completing targets in college when the windows are wide open, what in the world makes you think that he's going to be completing things in pro level when you really have to throw guys open? To me, it's just, I don't understand that. If you're the Cleveland Browns, I don't understand your thinking right there.
If you're going to succeed in the NFL at under 60%, you have to be Cam Newton, right? Mm-hmm. You have to be able to win in some sort of other way. That Cam has never gotten to 60%, but he's been an MVP. He's been to the Super Bowl. He can beat you with his legs. I don't think you're going to be able to run Josh Allen in the NFL. I mean, he can run, but I don't think he's going to run like Cam.
No, everybody combines, the 70-yard passes.
It's only 140. I think. Go ahead.
I'm caffeinated.
I see that.
But I mean, everybody, you watch everybody. You see all all the people talking on Twitter. Oh, look at Josh Allen with the 70, 75-yard with touch. Yeah, that looks great. But I mean, I want a guy that's surgical. I want a quarterback that's surgical. Yeah, a lot of people have big arms. It's elite. But I need a guy who's surgical. When it's crunch time, who'll be able to throw guys open and put it in tight windows. Not a guy, 75 yards, they can just throw it down the field. I don't know. I think people just overhyping that.
You got to feel pretty good about your offensive line if you think you can get a receiver 70 yards downfield in time for him to make a throw, right?
Absolutely. I'm not trying to hold people up that long.
Right here. All right, you done for now? Because we're going to come back to, you don't, anything else?
No,
I know the snow is an issue. Anything else you want to air?
I'm just getting started, Wendy.
Okay, all right, listen, fine. Don't give him any more coffee. Well, Mike Tomlin among the NFL brass on hand in Tuscaloosa, literally as we speak. 13 of Nick Saban's former disciples showcasing their talent today. It is Alabama's annual Pro Day, and we know that this program has been college football's elite in recent years. No better example than Julio Jones. 5 Pro Bowls since he entered the league in 2011. He won a national championship at Alabama in 2009. Amari Cooper was a freshman on Alabama's 2012 title team, totaling 1,000 receiving yards and 11 touchdowns. He's been to 2 Pro Bowls in his 3 seasons with the Raiders. A.J. McCarron quarterbacked the Tide to not 1 but 2 national titles. Things have been more difficult for him in the league. In 4 seasons with the Bengals, McCarron appeared in just 11 games with 3 starts. Derrick Henry, you may remember, won the 2015 Heisman Trophy before being drafted in the 2nd round by the Titans. He led Tennessee in rushing this past season, 156 yards against the Chiefs in the wild card game. And then there's Mark Ingram. He was Alabama's first ever Heisman winner before he was taken by the Saints in the 1st round of the 2011 draft. His last 2 seasons have been his best, rushing for over 1,000 yards in each. So there they are, the all-Alabama offense team, right from the top down. The offensive depth chart of Alabama players in the NFL. We've got the Heisman trophies in there. Julio at wide receiver. Ryan Kelly, one of the top centers in the game as well. So here we go again and again and again, because I mentioned those 13 players working out. One of those, the top wideout, or widely anticipated to be the top wideout in this draft, Calvin Ridley. So a scouting report, if you will.
I think he's the only legitimate first-round grade at the wide receiver position in this year's class. Remember, we had 3 receivers last year going the first 9 picks. And now we may only have 1 or 2 in the first round of this entire draft. So Ridley, to me, what he does best is route running. He's as advanced a route runner as I really can remember evaluating, certainly in the last several years. Gets off the press very quick. His game is built on quickness and speed, and he can take a 3-yard hitch route and take it 70 yards for a touchdown. Now, he's not the greatest in terms of 50-50 balls, and he's not the strongest guy, so there's some issues there. But overall, I think that he comes in and should very early in his career become a great number 2 receiver, if you will.
Well, I think it was Mike Vrabel in his introductory press conference called Alabama the minor leagues, the NFL's minor leagues, and there really is some truth to that. We'll talk a little bit more about Alabama players and their performance at the next level coming up. But we do want to show you this. Our Chris Mortensen just tweeting this regarding Richard Sherman, who we know is representing himself. Richard Sherman's future in Seattle is on the brink. Clearly, the Seahawks are in the midst of doing roster makeover after all the coaching changes. And they have had personnel coaching changes for the first time in quite some time. But the secondary is going to see an overhaul. But are you surprised to think that Richard Sherman days in Seattle may be numbered?
A little surprised, but nothing's impossible out there. They're trying to be ahead of the game in terms of this overhaul that's coming. And again, we don't know what we're reacting to here. But the cap number's over $14 million. There's no way that they were going to carry that this year. Even if he had gotten through last year healthy, something probably needs to be done to that contract. So we'll see what ends up happening here. But if Sherman is out, if you're talking about Earl Thomas was on the trade block at the Combine, Michael Bennett, we don't know the futures of Cam Chancellor and Cliff Averill. A lot of change, as Mort refers to, looming for Seattle.
And Pete Carroll joined us at the Combine on NFL Live and made it clear they've been planning for some of this. Obviously, this didn't sneak up on anybody. They've been known this group is getting older. There's been some injury concern. There's some cap issues. So they're planning for this, Damian. But, I get the sense that we may see more changes perhaps earlier than we anticipated.
Well, you got to think that what the Seattle Seahawks did was they got Russell Wilson. They discovered him, got him on the cheap, turned out to be a great player. And they had him on a cheap contract. So you were able to sign the Legion of Boom and some of the other guys on defense. And once Russell Wilson got that new contract, then all of a sudden you start seeing some of the injuries with guys on defense. And with the cap situation, now you have to start making decisions because obviously you got to start getting younger. And you got to be under the cap.
And this was one of the best drafting teams in the league for about a
which is critical
4 or 5 year span. And then all of a sudden it kind of dried up. I don't understand why or know why, but they haven't found the Bobby Wagners in the later rounds and those type of players that they were finding year in and year out. And it kind of goes back to my point about Kirk Cousins. Russell Wilson can actually carry you in some games.
Right.
Kirk Cousins, very rarely do you see that same type of production and ability to throw your team on the shoulder and go win games. So if you're going to spend this kind of money on Kirk Cousins.
Well, that's the question. If you're the Minnesota Vikings, is it worth it to pony up that type of cash? You got to the NFC Championship game?
Yes.
Last year with Case Keenum. Does it make sense to pony up $30+ million a year for a quarterback that really can't carry your franchise?
Well, it was this time last year, actually, at the Combine, that it was apparent Richard Sherman was on the trading block. There was some communication about that. Then things sort of smoothed over for the season. And so now here we are with Chris Mortensen saying that it appears Richard Sherman's days in Seattle may be numbered. And this from Jeremy Lane, that text message got my heart hurting. 25 was my dog with the hashtag what's next. So again, we saw the personnel changes in terms of coordinators in Seattle, and now I think we're moving to the next level of change.
Cryptic, for sure. And I'll tell you what they did do in the draft last year. They drafted 5 defensive backs. Yep. So this is a team that knew that it had to replenish on the back end of its defense at some point. And again, looking ahead, go back a year, they're looking ahead and wondering how much longer are we going to have this whole group together, Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, Cam Chancellor, all them. So
Michael Bennett.
Yes.
Even Michael Bennett.
And he's a guy that if they don't find a trade partner for him could be released. Right. And again, major defensive overhaul coming at some point. Will it all be done this offseason? It could. And again, we'll see. Jeremy Lane's tweet there, fairly cryptic for sure.
I asked Pete Carroll the same question, and I know that those of us in the media who sit here sometimes overplay this. We like to talk about windows and timelines and all of those things. But I do think it's fair in this case. Is Seattle's championship window with this group closing?
No, I don't think it's I think whenever you have a coach and quarterback combination, you always have a chance.
Fair enough.
But do they need to retool their roster? Absolutely, because you're seeing within the division, you got the Los Angeles Rams. They're well on their way. The San Francisco 49ers, they finished on a five-game winning streak to end the season. So you would think that there's some upswing, coming that way. So They see what's coming. They see what's happening. They need to get younger.
Well, it's interesting. I want to go back to something you said, Todd, that drought's too strong a word, but that there had been a little bit of drop-off. Because when I think of Seattle, I think of a draft and develop team.
Right.
And so to have you reference that, are you confident that they can sort of get back on the same page and go back to that in this draft?
No question. I mean, the Patriots went through a little bit of this, if you remember, about 8-9 years ago, where there was 2 or 3 years where they just seemed like they were missing. But you also, when you have a bunch of veteran guys, especially on the defensive side, that are occupying the starting jobs, it's tough for a young player to crack the lineup and to show what they can do, and then you don't wind up getting a lot of reps during practice during the season. So part of it may just be, like it was with New England in certain instances, that guys just aren't getting opportunities to play there because they have had such a solidified roster for the last several years.
And I think a lot of times with like really good coaches, they want to get rid of people maybe a year early than holding on to a guy.
Well, I think Bill Belichick sort of errs on the side of caution when it comes to that.
Absolutely, and that's what you could be seeing right now. Again, now a lot of it is injuries. Guys have been injured on the back in the secondary, but you need to start getting rid of these guys now rather than when they're
getting older and they're having trouble staying healthy.
Yeah, which is what happens. I mean, it's not, we've seen this movie before. Eventually it comes for just about every group, no matter how dominant.
Attention shoppers, clean up on aisle 14. Clean up on aisle 14. Someone dropped a jar of pickles. Kosher pickles.
Beatboxing at a big box store. Surprising. What's not surprising? How much you could save by switching to Geico.
A red minivan has the lights on in the parking lot.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more.
Geico.
We continue to monitor a situation involving Richard Sherman and his future with the Seattle Seahawks. Here's the latest tweet, this from Adam Schefter. Seahawks cornerback Richard Sherman is now on his way to the NFLPA meetings, which happen in Las Vegas. They begin Thursday, and so any talks with the Seahawks regarding his future, which now appears to be unsettled, will continue while he's in Las Vegas. Just a reminder, Richard Sherman is representing himself, Dan, but as we continue to sort of watch this, you sort of clarified it for me, and I'll just ask what you think is going on right now.
Look, it's an $11 million salary and a $13.2 million cap hit for this year. The Seahawks have to do some rearranging on their salary cap, and that's a big number for a guy who's coming off an Achilles injury. They don't know if he's going to be ready to start this season. If he's heading into the latter part of his career, if he's still going to be worth that amount of money. Damian can speak to this. When a team goes to a player and says, we need to do something with your contract, and the player doesn't want to, what happens? The player gets cut. So that's a potential thing. If Seattle needs to do something with the contract and Sherman doesn't want to work with them or isn't happy with the numbers that they're talking about, he certainly could be in a situation where he's no longer on their team.
Well, Sherman has suggested that he hasn't been told anything official, but that would make sense because these conversations will have to happen. They will have to understand what he's willing to do, what he's not willing to do before they can make the appropriate decisions. We'll continue to watch this. Again, Chris Mortensen, the first to tweet that it looks like Richard Sherman's days in Seattle are numbered. We do want to go back to the combine. We're talking about the draft and looking forward, especially these quarterbacks. UCLA quarterback Josh Rosen ran a 4.92 40, 13th among quarterbacks. His vertical jump of 31 inches, the 5th best. Here's Peter King talking about the perception of Rosen on the Dan Patrick Show.
All I heard from people around the NFL is that we don't like this guy. The sort of wiseacre stuff that he did in college with, putting a hot tub in his room and wearing the anti-Trump cap to play golf at a Trump golf course. And just, he's sort of a wise guy. I met him, and I thought he was very reasonable. I thought he had good analyses of who he is as a person. To me, the NFL has an inherent distrust of rich kids. They just do. And you have to prove to them that being rich doesn't matter. Josh Rosen's family is wealthy. So a lot of people in the NFL just sort of roll their eyes at that to begin with. The best answer he gave me is that having all this money and being this competitive and being at the Combine and playing in the Pac-12 and everything, that should prove to you, how much I love football and how much I want football.
A lot of layers to this. I do want to add that Bill Polian also got a chance to sit down with Rosen before the Combine and had a similar assessment. He called him a different type of thinker, creative. He said he did have takes on things that not everybody did, but Bill found him to be very reasonable and self-assured, confident without being arrogant. I'll ask you before we talk about the wealth issue and how much he wants to play, what you think the perception of Josh Rosen is right now amongst NFL folks.
I think the decision makers are still gathering information and won't really make a decision until they have brought him in and spent a whole day with him and put him on the board, but more importantly, test him, take him out of his comfort zone, try to do different things to see how he reacts. Josh Rosen is a why guy. He wants to know why. You tell him something with his footwork, why? You tell him you want to make a scheme change, why? And that to a coach can be, first of all, annoying. And second of all, it can feel like there's some disrespect. And then there's also a lot of guys I've talked to said that he's very tough on his receivers, but in a way that's condescending. And if he thinks he's smarter than this receiver and the receiver was not in the right place, he can be very tough to work with. So there's questions about him and coachability and how he is as a teammate. But you also have to kind of sift through it because the guys who are putting out a lot of these reports are NFL scouts who are not making a ton of money. And they're gone from their families 70 of 90 days in stretches. And it gets to a point where there's frustration. And you look at this kid who's rich, who's coming out, and he's about to make even more money. And so you start hearing some things, and it can get overblown a little bit. And I also think, unlike most other prospects and quarterback prospects, the UCLA coaching staff is fired. And so when you're a coach of a school, you're never going to come out and say negative things about a player because of recruiting. You can't let that get out there. These coaches aren't coaching at UCLA anymore, and so I think there's been some more leaks, if you will, of information and maybe some frustration because they're fired when it has to do with Rosen. So I just caution everyone, until we get all of the information, I think the narrative's probably been a little bit too strong on Josh Rosen to this point.
Let's go back to this point. You've made the point. Peter King made the point. I think we've seen it in the past with other players. This perception that wealthy players don't want it as badly, don't need to succeed in the same way as a player whose financial future was more in question. Do you think the NFL has a bit of a bias, especially toward younger players who come in from considerable wealth?
I think the NFL has a problem with players that are layered. And what I mean by that is guys, the NFL always talks about guys, we want guys that are all in on football. But guess what? That could be the detriment to the player because I've seen it time and time again. A lot of these guys who are all in, put everything in the bucket as far as the NFL is concerned. Guess what? When their career is over, whether it's 3 years, the average, or they have a prolonged career, they get out. Their whole identity is tied to the game of football. Then the next question is, what am I to do now? So to me, a guy like Josh Rosen, who seems like he's a layered guy, who he's articulate, he's a thinker. He has other interests going on. I got news for you.
Aaron Rodgers. I mean, some of the things that he's into, and I mean, he has a lot of other interests, but he still puts in the time and is arguably the best quarterback, second best quarterback.
I don't think they're mutually exclusive, but I think that the NFL sometimes assumes they are. I agree with you.
I just feel like the NFL sometimes just want these guys to just be just all about ball all the time. And I just think when you look at the guys who are coming in now, guys who are growing up in social media, they're just from a different age. If the NFL can't adapt to these new age players who have other interests outside the game, you can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can be a guy who's all about ball but have other interests as well. The thing it's just, to me, the NFL, some of the people in the NFL, it's so antiquated the way they're thinking.
Listen, Dan. Go ahead.
I mean, you don't want to homogenize and say every coach, every scout is like this, but there is a tendency in the NFL to try and put people in and keep people in their boxes, right? If you don't fit what I'm looking for a quarterback, then it doesn't make sense to me, and I'm going to go on to somebody who does. You do see that from time to time. I'm not sure it's exclusive to the NFL, but we cover the NFL where we see it up close. So I think you see a guy who strikes decision makers and scouts as maybe a little bit different from what they're used to seeing in a college quarterback prospect, so they want to find out more. The people I talked to in Indy said, we want to find out how he relates to teammates. If he relates to teammates fine, that eases a lot of concern.
Well, look, and then there was, you don't have to look too far in the past. Johnny Manziel came from money. I think there's a little bit of a lingering hangover from that. But you know what? That was one of many, many issues, so it's really not fair. Listen, apparently today is the day for news out of Seattle. Not surprisingly, the Seahawks appear to be making some decisions. And Adam Schefter just tweeting this. Here it goes. This is the first domino to officially fall with that secondary. Seahawks are trading defensive end Michael Bennett and a 7th-round pick to the Eagles for a 5th-round pick and wide receiver Marcus Johnson. This is according to sources. Also, Chris Mortensen just tweeting about 15-20 minutes ago that Richard Sherman's days in Seattle are now in question.
Damian Scoop Schefter.
Yeah, what'd you just say, Damian? Hello?
Huh.
Well?
Look, I think it's great for the Eagles. I really do. Because the one thing that Michael Bennett does well, and that's a premium in the NFL, is an interior rusher. He's a guy you can put in, you can move him up and down the defensive line, and he can win one-on-one matchups. And when you look at the Eagles' defensive line, whether you're talking about Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, now you add in, a Michael Bennett, who are you going to double? It's going to be one-on-ones.
Barnett's going to be a second-year player.
Yeah, you got one-on-one. You got one-on-ones across the board. Who are you going to double on that Eagles defensive line?
Loaded.
And they thrive on that idea of a deep defensive line rotation so you can be stronger than the other team come the fourth quarter. I would watch now the situation with Vinnie Curry. That's a contract situation the Eagles have been trying to do something with. Bringing in Michael Bennett certainly would seem to indicate that they might have some leverage.
Well, that's why they drafted the kid Derek Barnett.
Derek Barnett, right, yeah. That's the biggest difference between Atlanta not finishing and the Eagles finishing in the Super Bowl.
That's right.
Listen, here we go. We are making our way towards March 14th, the first day of the new league year. I believe Adam Schefter now with us, who just tweeted that Michael Bennett has been traded to Philadelphia. Adam, what more can you tell us about that decision?
Wendy, here are the details of the trade as they have just come in. The Seahawks just notified Michael Bennett that he is being dealt to Philadelphia. It is Michael Bennett and a 7th-round draft pick to the Philadelphia Eagles for a 5th-round draft pick and wide receiver Marcus Johnson. Now, both teams get something that they were looking for in this particular deal. From the Eagles' standpoint, the Eagles get a pass rusher that they'll be able to use on third down. Michael Bennett, you look at the inside rush, Michael Bennett and Fletcher Cox. The outside rush, Derek Barnett and Brandon Graham. That is a fearsome foursome that the Eagles will be able to send at opposing quarterbacks on third down. From the Seahawks standpoint, they get back a 5th-round draft pick and a wide receiver in Marcus Johnson, who runs the 40 in 4.36. Now keep in mind that Seattle has Paul Richardson, who's becoming a free agent. And I think a lot of people believe that he will not stay in Seattle this offseason. So if Paul Richardson does decide to go, that signals the fact that the Seahawks now have an insurance wide receiver in Marcus Johnson, who they get in the Michael Bennett trade today that just moments ago was agreed to. Of course, we can get to Richard Sherman. We'll follow up on that. But again, to repeat and summarize the details of the trade, Michael Bennett in his 7th to Philadelphia for Marcus Johnson, a wide receiver, and a 5th-round pick.
Adam, thank you. And we do get the sense, as you said, here it goes. I think we're probably just getting started with regards to the Seahawks. So you mentioned Richard Sherman. Is there anything you understand to be the case now, sort of the next steps as that situation tries to resolve itself?
Well, let's tell you where that situation is at, Wendy, right now. Basically, there have been conversations that have been ongoing about Richard Sherman's future in Seattle between Richard Sherman, who represents himself without an agent, and the Seahawks front office and coaching staff. They have not reached any firm conclusions. It is looking as if it is very possible that Richard Sherman could be a free agent, that they could move on. Look, he's coming off an Achilles injury. He, right now, is scheduled to make $13 million a year on a team that's looking to find ways to create payroll. So you've got a team that's looking to create ways to get payroll. You got a cornerback coming off an Achilles injury who's representing himself. And right now, if the two sides can't find a common ground, the Seahawks would wind up releasing him. Now, again, there have been reports that Richard Sherman is scheduled to meet with the Seahawks. That's not true. He's traveling as we speak on the way to the NFLPA meetings in Las Vegas that are scheduled to begin tomorrow. The conversations between Sherman and the Seahawks will continue to unfold here, but obviously Seattle is very busy. We saw the Seahawks reshape their coaching staff. We saw them make numerous changes with Tom Cable, Darrell Bevel, Chris Richard on the defense side of the football, and now we're seeing them begin to remake that roster as we speak. Michael Bennett traded to Philadelphia, and ongoing discussions with Richard Sherman regarding his future, which remains unsettled, while the team also looks to see if it could find a trade partner for Earl Thomas.
Shefty, thank you. Again, we continue to watch this. And Pete Carroll referenced it last week at the Combine, stopping short of calling anything an overhaul as most coaches will do, but certainly referencing that there have been some changes and there were more to come. How different, when this is all said and done, Dan, how different will this defense look?
Well, significantly different, especially when you factor in the injury situations with Cam Chancellor and Cliff Averill. Pete Carroll hinted earlier in the offseason that there's a chance neither of those guys would play again. So you subtract those two, you subtract Bennett. Hypothetically, you're now subtracting Sherman. That's 4 significant star-level starters that have been instrumental in their success. And then Adam just mentioned Earl Thomas, who's been out there as well, although I still think that's not a deal where they're trying to unload salary. They're trying to see if they can get something really good in exchange for him. But, it's a big change. And as we discussed earlier, the smart teams try to stay ahead. And if Seattle sees change coming on the horizon, the best way is to get ahead of it, address it with aggressive moves, and this is certainly one of those.
I also think that there might be kind of a changing of the guard in regards to the personalities in the locker room. You look at the dominant personalities with that Seahawks team over the past few years, it's been beast mode, it's been Richard Sherman and Michael Bennett, okay? Russell Wilson, he's gotten paid, he's the quarterback, he's supposed to be the guy. Now you're just starting to unload some of those guys, from Seattle. So it just seems like the transition is now fully being handed to Russell Wilson.
It's becoming his team for the first time ever.
It's becoming his team.
That's
no longer, Michael Bennett, outspoken Michael Bennett, the outspoken Richard Sherman. It's becoming Russell Wilson's team.
Those are some big personalities. I mean, you talk about the talent level and a lot of things walking out the door if they're both gone. Big personality is also sort of shifting. Todd, obviously this will have implications, I would think, in the draft and what Seattle intends to do in April.
Yeah, you'd think so. I mean, now you need to fill that void if cornerback could become another need. Although you mentioned they drafted 5 defensive backs a year ago, which is a really good point. And they still have to solidify that offensive line. So they're picking at 18 overall, I believe, and it's not a great offensive line year, or offensive tackle at least. So it'll be interesting to see. Now it may shift over the defensive side in terms of what the priority is early in the draft.
Yeah, Josina Anderson also tweeting that she has been in contact with Richard Sherman himself via text, and that Sherman says he hasn't been told anything just yet. We know he's on his way to the NFLPA meetings in Las Vegas. File under to be continued. There's no question about that.
This is the business of the NFL. Everyone sees the glamour in the games and stuff during the season, but no one really talks about the offseason when the business of the NFL. And this is when the cold aspect of the NFL is the business that's being done, where you got to make tough, hard decisions on guys who've been, integral parts of your franchise, winning championships. And a guy like Richard Sherman, who's been a great player for a long time, probably looking at a situation like, man, I can't believe it's coming to this moment. But when dollars and cents are brought up to go along with your injury, tough decisions have to be made.
Dan, I'll ask you to sort of clarify the dollars and cents that we're talking about here, as specifically with regard to Sherman, as Seattle tries to make a decision going forward.
1 year left on his deal. He's owed $11 million in salary, and his cap hit for this year is $13.2 million. So you go to him and you see, will he take a pay cut? You can't. It's only 1 year left on the deal, so you can't do what Antonio Brown did and restructure and unless you want to extend him. But you're not going to extend a guy coming off a season-ending Achilles injury. So these are the challenges that face Richard Sherman and the Seahawks. They have to get that number down. They have to either work with him to do it, or they have to tell him thanks for everything, good luck.
How about the flip side of it, too, though, the Eagles? I mean, Howie Roseman, Joe Douglas, and that whole crew, they're doing what the great teams do. They're taking advantage. It's like when someone goes bankruptcy and now all of a sudden they're foreclosure and you go take a house. It's exactly what the Eagles are doing. I mean, look at their defensive line right now.
It's dangerous.
I mean, Bennett can play inside, outside. I don't know if Curry's going to be back, but you still have Graham, Cox, and Jernigan inside. And Long as well. So, I mean, they are absolutely loaded up front defensively, and they're very smart in how they're doing business right now.
Hello, NFC East.
Hello. Rich getting richer, I might add. They are the reigning Super Bowl champions. Adam Schefter back with us, and this is one of those days where I think the situation will just be fluid and continue to evolve. Adam, what else you have?
Well, it's a situation here where, Wendy, right now Michael Bennett was away, but the Seahawks reached out to him a short time ago. They went to the Combine last week to entertain trade ideas. And as you mentioned before, Pete Carroll, John Schneider, they've talked about how this is a roster in flux right now. So when they talk to teams around the league, the two teams that seemed to be the most interested in Michael Bennett were the Atlanta Falcons, who were coached by Dan Quinn, who coached Michael Bennett in Seattle before, and the Philadelphia Eagles, two of the best teams in the NFC who met in the playoffs, both interested in upgrading their pass rush. Obviously, talks with the Eagles escalated after the combine to the point where the two teams were able to agree to that deal today. They wanted to reach out to notify Michael Bennett. They did that a short time ago. Again, the trade is now agreed to. It cannot be processed until March 14th. And we've already seen a slew of trades happen so far before the new league year begins 1 week from today. We've seen Alex Smith dealt from Kansas City to Washington. We've seen Marcus Peters dealt from Kansas City to L.A. We've seen Robert Quinn dealt from L.A. to Miami. And now we've seen Michael Bennett dealt from Seattle to Philadelphia, a team that recognizes it can't rest on what it did last season. It can't be complacent. It has to shake up the roster and acquire added parts. And so now the Eagles have gone out and done that. They have actually strengthened their pass rush with one of the more inside pass rush feared players in the game, in Michael Bennett. The Eagles get stronger in their front. And again, this will bring up some other situations. Vinny Curry is in a situation now where the Eagles still could now find a deal for him. He could be on the trade market, and a trade for Michael Bennett could mean the trade of Vinny Curry to another team. The Seahawks know that they could lose Paul Richardson, the speedy wide receiver in free agency, and that's one reason they were interested in talking to the Eagles about Marcus Johnson, who has yet to establish himself at the NFL level, but has the speed that the Seahawks coveted right now. And again, we talked about the moves that the Eagles are and still will be making, and the same is true of the Seattle Seahawks in this particular case. They have now traded Michael Bennett. Richard Sherman is in discussions about his unsettled future in Seattle, and it's possible that he could become a free agent this offseason. And Earl Thomas has been shopped to other teams, and if the Seahawks could find the right price, they'd be open to trading their safety, Earl Thomas, as well.
Adam, thank you. As is almost always the case, one move leads to another move, which leads to another move in the business of the NFL, which continues to happen despite the fact that, as you mentioned, we are making our way toward the start of a new league year, March 14th. That's 1 week from today.
Flap, pustule, jowls, nugget, gurgle, smear, bulbous, pork.
If you hear certain words on the job site,
baloney,
work can be uncomfortable.
Tender.
So at least get work gear that's comfortable. Timberland Pro work shirts, pants, and boots. Head to toe, Timberland Pro. Not uncomfortable.
Moist.
NFL Live continues with more perspective now on Michael Bennett's apparent trade to the Philadelphia Eagles. Our Diana Rossini says there were a bunch of teams in the running for Michael Bennett. New England, Cleveland, Tampa, and the Falcons, to just name a few. And as we just heard from Michael Schefter, these conversations began at the Combine, and Seattle made it known, tried to see who might be out there, and then ultimately it was Philadelphia who got the deal done. Listen, the rich get richer when it comes to pass rushers, because Philadelphia had plenty, and now they got one more.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean look, listen, you go back and look at the Super Bowl. It just took one play from Brandon Graham that was a deciding factor in that game. So you can't have enough pass rushes. Again, Michael Bennett plays at a premium position, an interior pass rusher, and like you said, the rich is getting richer right here.
I think and they're in an interesting situation. The Eagles, they have to clear some cap space. This is a contract they'll be taking on. They'll owe his $3 million roster bonus on March 18th. Seattle obviously didn't want to pay that. And the Eagles take on 2 more years after 2018, where his salary goes up to $6-7 million a year range. So we'll see how long he is for Philadelphia. But, they're in a position where Carson Wentz doesn't make a lot of money, and his backup is Nick Foles, who doesn't make a lot of money, and they're not spending a lot of money on that position that sucks so much out of teams' salary caps, and they can spend on other positions. We talked about this earlier about, the Broncos, are they overcommitted at a position? Can they afford to pay a quarterback? So, yeah, the Eagles are obviously very aggressive. It's gotten them where they are, which is Super Bowl champions, and more moves to come from their end. But obviously they saw a premium player available at a pretty good price.
I want to bring up another angle as well. that Michael Bennett is being traded to the Philadelphia Eagles. You know, the Philadelphia Eagles they're a team that have guys that are socially active. And with Malcolm Jenkins, Chris Long, and we know that Michael Bennett has been in that same boat as well. So, I'm pretty sure when you're exploring a trade market, there's going to be some teams that's going to have trepidation because of, the whole protest that Michael Bennett has been a part of and all those type of things. So the fact that he was dealt to the Philadelphia Eagles, I think just shows like the state of their organization and franchise. I
think there's no doubt that there are teams or franchises in the National Football League who have a higher comfort level with some of this stuff than others. We know that. Ownership's been vocal about that. Some don't want any part of it. Some are okay with the total package that Michael Bennett brings.
You do wonder now, though, can they afford to keep all of these parts together?
Right.
Does that mean that's the end for Chris Long? Does that mean it's the end for Curry, Vinny Curry? So I think that's something to keep an eye on. Right. We look at this depth chart right now and say, they've got all these guys, but something's got to give at some point.
Do they have to do something with Jason Peters' contract? That's a big number, too. But, you're right, Damian. There was, and again, it drives you nuts, but, you did hear that at the Combine. Hey, if they want to trade Michael Bennett, you can rule out half the league because there are teams that won't take a guy who's kneeling for the national anthem.
Right. Yeah, that's real. I mean, that's out
real.
there.
It's too bad, but it's real.
Again, Michael Bennett traded to the Philadelphia Eagles. We continue to monitor reaction as word gets out. And Jalen Mills has this to say. All I can say is, welcome to the gang. The Seahawks defense has wreaked havoc on opposing teams throughout Pete Carroll's tenure there, but are they slipping? These numbers suggest that, in fact, they are. The worst in these three statistical categories since 2010. Perhaps the more important number here is that Seattle missed the playoffs for the first time since 2011. So Seattle making some changes, some coordinator moves that we haven't seen for quite some time under Pete Carroll, and now some personnel moves on the field as well. Let's talk about the next, the young guard, if you will, Todd. Who's next to step up out there in Seattle? Because we did already know this group was getting older and injured.
Yeah, well, they obviously, as you put it, they swung for the fences. They were hoping last year with Malik McDowell that they were going to get a big-time playmaker, but they knew he came with some concerns. That's why they got him as late as they did. They really focused on defense last year, and Shaquille Griffin is a starter at the cornerback position. They've got 4 other defensive backs that they drafted, so the hope is now that some of that youth is going to step up. But it's an interesting team because for as great as they were drafting for about a 4 or 5 year stretch, at the top of the draft and in later rounds. I mean, getting Russell Wilson in the 3rd round, Bobby Wagner, I think, was the 3rd round, that range. They recently have struggled more. And if you look at it, part of it may just be they're a better team drafting on the defensive side. I mean, they've had a lot of great draft picks on the defensive side several years ago. And then for a 3-year stretch, it was 3 out of 4 were offensive players. 3 of their first 4 picks in 15 were offensive players. 2 out of 3, their top 3 in 14 were offensive players. And 5 of their first 7 picks were on the offensive side. And then last year they finally went back to more of a defensive-centric draft. So that just may be the case.
I mean, if you're reading the tea leaves, which is all we can do at the present moment, it would seem that way. Here's a look at Seattle's potential depth chart, and this is without Michael Bennett. The trade, as you heard Adam Schefter explain, has been agreed to. It cannot be official until March 14th when the new league year officially begins. That is, though, just a week from today. And some of these questions have to be answered because there's free agency, of course, and then followed by the draft. And teams have to know what they're dealing with. We've also reported that it is possible Richard Sherman will not continue his career in Seattle. He's got a cap number that will need to be adjusted. He's representing himself and has said to Josina Anderson that although he hasn't been told anything official, that there is dialogue. So you've got Bennett, you've got Sherman, who Earl Thomas, I think, is a question for different reasons that will have to be answered. On that depth chart,
Sheldon Richardson in there, he's a free agent. There's no guarantee they're going to re-sign him. Cliff Averill and Cam Chancellor, as we've discussed, have significant injury concerns. We don't know that they'll be back. Obviously, they have to replenish there, and I think that really points it up, right? And that defensive line, the 2 guys on the right here might not be there, and the 2 guys on the left, we still aren't sure about in terms of long-term success in the league. And yeah, this is a big rebuild in Seattle. How poised are they to do it? How can they do it via free agency? Can they make more trades that help bolster them on defense? We will see. But I think It's always important when something comes to an end, if this is what's happening here, and it seems like at least things will change significantly in Seattle, what they accomplished as a group. I mean, to be as good as they were defensively. I did want to put that in perspective. Right? To be as good as they were defensively for half a decade in the salary cap era really says a lot about who these guys are and the kind of players they have been. They won a Super Bowl. The defense would probably tell you they had a second Super Bowl one if there wasn't an interception at the goal line late. But it deserves to be looked at as an all-time great group, regardless of what its future is.
Here's the question. Can Russell Wilson carry the team? Mm-hmm. Now when you get all of these guys that are slowly leaving that team, the pressure is squarely on Russell Wilson. Because like I said earlier in the show, they're starting to get rid of these big personalities that's dominated that locker room. And they're transitioning that power to Russell Wilson. Can he shoulder the load and carry a team like a Tom Brady?
And Aaron
Rodgers. That's really the question. Honestly, we don't know yet. We don't know.
He hasn't been asked
to totally carry a franchise.
He was asked to do a lot this year. He was their leading rusher by a wide margin this year, in addition, obviously, to being their leading passer. Can they build him an offensive line, and can they build him a run game? And if the answer to those two questions is no, then the answer to your question is going to turn out to be no as well.
They got to fix the offensive line. He can't run as much, whether it was running for positive yards or just scrambling and taking the hits that he took. No quarterback can continue to take that amount of hits to the body and stay healthy. So I think that's got to be a huge priority, is to protect this investment.
Mm-hmm. A busy day here on NFL Live. The Eagles had one of the deepest defensive line rotations in the league already. They had 7 defensive linemen record at least 400 snaps this season. That's the most in the NFL. And, of course, today, I think we so aptly put it, the rich get richer, and they have added Michael Bennett to the mix in an apparent trade agreed to with Seattle. It will become official next week. And look, I think you could make the argument they were already sort of a favorite to defend their title. You got to think this move only helps their cause, Damian.
Listen, you need 2 things in the NFL. You need a man who can throw the quarterback, and you need people to get after your quarterback. The Eagles have both. They're right there in the mix.
They got 2 quarterbacks.
Yeah, neither of whom are overpaid. So listen, this is an exceptional position to be in, I think, when you're team building.
Oh, absolutely.
To make good decisions and also have the room and the money to make those decisions and pay for them, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Eagles they'll head in as one of the favorites. It'll be a strong NFC again. I think people will like the Saints, will like the Vikings as they figure out their quarterback situation. Some teams in the West on the come, but obviously you win one, you want to win another one.
That's
right?
right.
Yeah,
That's
listen, that you sure do. And Seattle, they'll be if you like change and you're a Seahawks fan, you're in good shape.
I don't think they do.
Enjoy the ride.
Enjoy the ride, everybody.
Jenny had a dream of joining the national bobsled team. She worked out relentlessly and knew that if she just refused to give up, one day her dream would come true and she'd stand triumphantly up on the podium. But when her kids reminded her that she was 52 and she lived in Texas, and maybe she started dreaming this dream a little late in life, she gave up on not giving up. But then she heard how Geico could save her money on car insurance, so she switched and achieved that dream instead.